When applying effects in the audio track mixer, like I say, these effects will apply across the entire track, which is a really smart way of applying effects economically across loads of clips. Alternatively, a lot of people apply effects onto clips manually by dragging and dropping, or they might select a lot of clips and sort of drag them on to all of them, or you sometimes see people copying. I do this more for video, but for copying an effect and pasting the attribute of that effect onto another clip, and you can choose which attributes of one clip go into the other. So this is good for doing color grading and all sorts of video effects, but you can use it for audio as well. It depends if you want an effect on individual clips or all of them. So you might decide that if you want some effects on certain clips, you might select the clip and apply it just to those clips. But if you want to apply effects across an entire track, it is very smart to use the audio track mixer to do that, because these effects here will apply all across this track here, which we've named DX for dialogue. So bear that in mind. Just want to show you the audio clip mixer, which is here, just to try and remove a bit of confusion that some people have around this. The audio clip mixer will show you the volume for whichever clip is selected as determined by where the scrubber is positioned. That is determined by where the scrubber is positioned in the timeline. So if I change the volume here, that changes the volume for the clip that I have selected as determined by that scrubber position. But you can also do that by clicking and dragging the line here, and that will update the fader position there. So you don't really need to use the audio clip mixer view. I just think it's more likely to cause you to accidentally change the volume of a clip or something. So I would actually avoid using the audio clip mixer view, really. You can do it, like I say, by clicking and dragging these volume automation lines. Now that takes us back to the effects track mixer, because quite often I see people going to town with keyframes, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with the odd keyframe. I quite like keyframing and automation. It's a smart way to get things done. And you can see keyframes in the effect control view for volume in this instance, because that's what I've just punched in with the pen tool. But if you find yourself punching in hundreds of volume keyframes, you're sort of wasting your time, because you want to be spending time doing more creative, fun stuff when it comes to storytelling. You don't want to be just sort of clicking and losing the will to live on Premiere here. So I want to show you a very useful effect called a compressor. Now, if you don't know what a compressor is, or you haven't used a compressor, I'm going to try and explain it in a very simple way, because it can be a bit confusing. Essentially, what a compressor does is it reduces the difference between the loudest part and the quietest part of a wave. So it reduces what we call the dynamic range. And it's a great way of reducing the volume of the louder parts, but leaving the quieter parts alone. And how it does that is essentially using a parameter called a threshold, which is essentially the volume level that it begins to reduce that volume. So you have to tell it where you want it to start affecting the volume in terms of reducing that volume. Let's just say at minus 20 dB. It's always good to use the numpad, type in minus 20 and then enter the numpad. The best way to enter values, good way to work. And then when the audio reaches minus 20 dB, it will begin to reduce the audio over that amount. So it's just reducing the louder parts of the signal and leaving the quiet part unaffected. And in order to reduce the volume over that amount, you need to tell it to reduce by a ratio. So a ratio of, let's say, a ratio of 3 would mean that for every 3 decibels the audio increases above that threshold, it actually only increases by 1, because it's a 3-to-1 ratio. So whatever number you see there, that to 1, that higher the ratio is, the more extreme the reduction of volume will be above that threshold. And you need to remember to turn it on, and you should see some gain reduction. This will show you when the compressor is reducing the volume above that point at that ratio. So without going too deep into compressors, I'll just show you how it works in real time. And that's just showing that it's peaking, which isn't good. Hopefully that was just internal software distortion, not location actual clipping into the audio recorder, which is more of an issue, which you'd need Audition to fix. If you see peaking here, sometimes it's just because you're running it too hot in Premiere itself. But you can see I'm going to play this, and I'm going to increase the compression by reducing the threshold as it plays, and you'll start to hear it working by reducing the loud parts of the wave. It's not a very dynamic recording here. You can see there's a lot of noise floor and there's just a few peaks. But if I just play this back, you'll hear it working. Again, you can go too far with the compressor and you can start to hear it working, which would distract you from the story, but also unintelligible high dynamic range dialogue can also distract you from the story. So it's about serving the story and trying to keep it as natural sounding as possible. So you've noticed that I've put the compressor, which is part of the dynamics effect, in the slot there, but I've left a gap because usually you put EQ before compression. There's a bit of a logical way to apply effects. And EQ, of course, we know is the division of sound into its component frequencies, which means we can change the volume of the signal, not by the total volume, but by individual frequency bands, which correspond to the low bass noise, mid-range, which is the body of the sound, and the high frequencies, which provide all the intelligibility. For example, I'm using a lavalier microphone at the moment, or a tie clip, and the high frequencies are important in terms of determining what I'm saying, making it intelligible, but the low frequencies give it a sort of warmth if you're listening back on speakers that can provide low frequencies, whereas the mids will provide the body and the tone, and again add to the sort of intelligibility of the sound. So usually you want to put an equalizer before a compressor, but that's up for debate in music particularly. So you have noise reduction first, then you have some EQ, then you might have some compression or some dynamics, and then after that you might have time-based effects or reverb or delays, things like that. So there is a bit of a logical order in using effects in a rack. And bear in mind as well that each individual channel of audio, each track or channel or microphone, will run through the master fader. It's quite smart to leave the fader positions at 0, which we call unity gain. You don't want to have crazy faders all over the place. So try to leave your faders at 0 and control the gain through effects. It's a smarter way to work, or you could just you could just click and drag the clip volume like that. The master channel will take all of the individual channels, and of course you can apply effects on the master channel too. So anything you put on the master channel in terms of dynamics or any of these effects whatsoever, and one that is quite handy is special mastering, because it's sort of got some options for loudness maximizing, which is boosting the loudness of your clip if it's quite soft. We don't want any EQ there on the master channel. We don't really want any reverb or any excitement or any widening. So just be aware of what you're doing. Be very selective when using effects. Try not to use too many crazy presets, because it will basically process your audio outside of your awareness. It's not really good. And when you're running effects, it's a really good idea to turn them off and on to compare them when they're working against when they're not. We call this A-Bing. You can see that it also, it's the same thing here. That's another bypass button there to A-B your effect on and off. So quite a smart way of applying effects on the master channel would be perhaps applying a bit of loudness maximizing only if you need to, some sort of gain-based process, followed by a limiter which acts as a ceiling. It's sort of like Gandalf in Lord of the Rings, you shall not pass over this amount, and that should be in the amplitude and compression section hard limiter. Double click that hard limiter, or we can control it here, but I don't really like this, like I say. That hard limiter maximum amplitude will not pass beyond that amount, which means you do not hit 0 dB, which is the point of pain. So I would always use a hard limiter on the master channel in Premiere or my audio application, which is a brick wall limiter. And you can set it to peak or true peak. It's probably a good idea to set it to true peak at -1 decibel, which is -1 enter. As per BBC technical specification recommendations, BBC won't accept your content if it goes beyond that point. They'll scan and deny your hard-worked footage. So there are some presets as well. There's -3, which is a recommendation by the BBC. -1 is an absolute limit for the BBC, but -3 is their recommendation. And do refer to Moodle Media Arts Skills Centre. I've actually linked the BBC documents I'm referring to here, or come speak to me about this if you're not sure. But this is very important to prevent output clipping or distortion. And another really handy effect I would put on the master channel, particularly at the very end, would be a loudness radar, which shows you over time, it's like a histogram over time. It gives you a reading of round about where your average loudness is. In order to read this properly, we want to set it to European settings of loudness units full scale, which shows us where we want in a -23 region up front. This is round about where you want your dialogue sitting in this region. Loud noises will of course creep up. Loud sound effects or perhaps a music segment might creep up, but just be aware of fatigue. It's something that I think less people are aware of now because we're uploading to web and there's no real standard about YouTube or in terms of loudness and fatigue, whereas on TV it's a much bigger deal because broadcasters don't want you switching away from their channel if the volume is all over the place. On the TV shows or movie shows, they want it to be consistent. They want to reduce customers essentially leaving them, volume surfing or channel surfing to other broadcasters. So that's important. That would be a rough approach to inserting effects using the audio track mixer expansion view here. It's so easy to miss this. I think Adobe should really make more of a thing about this because people just don't use this. It's a great shame because you're missing that functionality of inserting effects across an entire channel, and you're more likely to sort of do things the long roundabout way. So Adobe have included a new feature into Premiere called Essential Sound, and I personally wouldn't use this in its current manifestation because it's kind of increasing more room for confusion, I would say. I prefer to add effects manually here and then have those effects visible on the clip in the effect control view, and you're individually choosing what effect to apply there. You're not just putting a sort of blanket dialogue approach. The effect sound, the way it's built is almost like a bit of a barrier. It allows you to apply effects in such a way that you can't really see what's going on under the hood. It's a bit of a block between your decision-making process and the actual end result. I mean, you can see what it's applied if you go in through the effect controls. I've just very haphazardly applied these effects there. And you can sort of manually bypass or remove them if you like. But it's just good to be aware of what this does because I think this will eventually grow into a very powerful, useful feature. The idea is that, let's say you've got all different types of clips on a track. So I've labeled this dialogue, but let's just pretend that we've got sound effects, ambient, background noise, and dialogue all on the same track. This feature, Essential Sound, allows you to assign a designation, an audio type, to a selection of clips. So you might say, these are dialogue clips, these are music, and these are sound effects and ambience. I don't think that's the best way to work. I think you should be manually putting those clips on tracks that are named in such a way instead. But who am I to tell you what to do? I can only recommend. One reason this might be super useful that I can think of that you might want to use it is because you can use a feature called audio ducking, which essentially reduces the volume of one clip based upon another clip's dialogue. So, for example, if you have dialogue and you've got music playing in the background, you might want to tell the music clip to momentarily reduce in volume because you want that dialogue clip to be understood without the audio being so high in the background. Personally, I would do that in Adobe Audition. It's easier to have more control over that ducking process. But I very much would like to encourage you to experiment. So if you want to use that, by all means do, and let me know and come and show me what you've done. And it would be nice to see this essential sound being used in a creative way. I'm going to close it for now because remember, it's just a bit more careful to apply effects individually to clips or entire tracks. And if you are applying effects onto clips, you know, if you wanted to, you could create presets. You can create audio effect presets. So if I call this, let's say, Matt EQ, I save that. That preset is now, all the effects that were in this audio effects preset will now be bundled in. So you can apply loads of effects and they'll all be saved in one preset that you can then drag and drop onto one clip or a number of clips if you have them all highlighted, or indeed as you wish. So that's really handy to know that. It just means that you've got more manual control over what's going on at the clip level. And another option to bear in mind is you can right click on a clip and you can open the clip in Audition and you can process it more powerfully there. In Audition, when you make a save in the clip view, it will destructively overwrite that source clip. So that should update it automatically in Premiere. However, those of you who are thinking more long-term, you'll be essentially working towards a picture lock. You won't be doing any audio processing in Premiere. You'll just be cutting up your timeline, getting everything synced, organizing things, naming tracks. Then once you're ready for the sound edit, once you've got your picture lock, and only when you have your picture lock, you will be right-clicking on your sequence and you will be editing the entire sequence in Audition. And you'll be working on all the audio there and exporting it down to a stereo WAV at 48 kilohertz at 24 bits, which is our pro audio format, and you'll be pulling it back into Premiere or perhaps pulling it into DaVinci for your kind of finishing or your mastering stage. But I just want to bear in mind that I just want to highlight the fact that a lot of people don't do the jump into Audition or Logic or Pro Tools until the picture is locked, and that causes a lot of issues. If you make that transition before you have a picture lock, you're potentially causing huge sync issues as the picture continues to be cut in your NLE, your video program, if the audio is already set as a certain sequence in your audio application. So in other words, it can cause massive incompatibilities between different programs, massive headaches, and I will just say that that should be a one-time jump into your audio, digital audio workstation, your DAW. It should be a one-time jump in after you've picture locked only, and then it should be, well, you can export back multiple times if you're working on the audio, but it should be a one-time hop. So that being said, we're going to move on past effects now because there's so many effects to talk about, and it's just good to generally be aware of compression and EQ as a starting point and to have a general awareness of the order that you put them in. So in Audition, you would have much more powerful sound restoration, noise removal features. You do have some level of control here, but Audition has spectral frequency views and all sorts of more powerful options for capturing noise prints and sound prints and more advanced stuff. But also you might choose to go into Logic as well, or instead of Audition. Logic is really powerful for doing sound design and for composing, scoring original audio as you're doing your mix, but you might miss some of the more Adobe-based noise restoration and removal features that you might find in Audition if you're in Logic, because Logic's noise removal isn't quite there, and it's the same for well, Pro Tools. Other programs rely on third-party plugins such as Isotope, to remove the noise. So just be aware that there's a reason why you might choose to go into Audition versus Logic.